Welcome back to the best year of your life. We are in conversation today with Kelly McGonigal. I'm going to begin by sharing a little bit about Kelly and then we'll get started. Dr. Kelly is a health psychologist and lecturer at Stanford who specializes in understanding the mind-body connection. Her TED Talk, How to Make Stress Your Friend, is one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time with over 20 million views.
It's actually 30.
Oh, we're at 30 now. All right.
200 million. I was like, damn, I haven't checked my stats lately.
Okay. 30 million, but getting to 200 million soon. Kelly is the best-selling author of The Willpower Instinct and the Upside of Stress. Her latest book, The Joy of Movement, explores why physical exercise is a powerful antidote to the modern epidemics of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. She also has an audiobook called 40 Days to Positive Change, Daily Support to Create a New Habit. Dr. McGonigal helped create the Stanford Compassion Cultivation Training, a course now taught around the world, and in 2020, Oprah Magazine named her the first ever O Visionary, people whose groundbreaking way of seeing the world mean a better future for us all. So today is day 3 of the Best Year of Your Life Summit, and I am thrilled to be in the conversation with Kelly McGonigal. Our topic today is the science of creating new habits. And as someone who is so well known for her ability to translate science into practical strategies that support healthy habits, I know we will learn so much today. Welcome, Kelly. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful.
Is there a habit you want to build? Now I'm curious since we're talking habits.
So many habits. Would the simple answer be like consistency? Is that it? I mean, consistency in what? I'm sure would probably make that the next question.
Well, no, actually, I love that. That's such an interesting perspective to bring. The idea that the habit you want to create could be acting in a way that is consistent with your values or consistent with your commitments or, I don't know, consistent with your priorities. I love that. That's so different than what people often say, which is like, I want to exercise every day or meditate every day.
That was going to be my next one was I'm like, I just moved and there's a park around and I'm like, oh, I want to go for a walk every single day with my dog, even though it's going to be 20 degrees outside.
I love that. This is like already just a takeaway people should have is this idea that you want to choose a habit that is consistent with your values or your aspirations, like connecting to nature, spending time with your dog. Maybe you're committing to experiencing more play. That could be something you get when you're taking your dog out in nature. And then you're going to do that consistently. That like consistency could have that dual meaning. It's not just doing something every day to get the gold star. It's that you're making choices that reflect what matters most to you and who you want to be or become.
It's exactly that, because it's not just about the exercise and, oh, let me mark off today. It's how I feel when I'm walking with my dog, how we feel, how we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I got out of this apartment or this house and whatever. Sunshine. And you feel so much better doing it. But sometimes it's so hard to be like, oh, I'm good here.
See, I'm so glad I asked you because you're already previewing some of the things I think we're going to talk about. Like this idea that even when you're out there, you could pay attention to your direct experience, like how you feel when the sun is on you or how you feel when you're out in nature and you hear the sounds of nature. That's part of how we build habits is we make choices where the direct experience, if we pay attention, we understand how it supports us and our well-being.
Yeah. I love that. So before we get into all of that crazy stuff, clearly you are somebody that blends science, storytelling, neuroscience, psychology, anthropology, biology, evolutionary biology to real life strategies to help people actually develop these better habits. So let's first start talking about how you even got into this and what made you choose this pathway to help everybody.
Yeah, I think, the one thing that all of my work has in common is I'm really fascinated by the fact that human beings seem to have these competing instincts. So, for example, I'm someone who was born with a very anxious temperament. So I'm familiar with the instinct to try to avoid pain and discomfort and want to protect ourselves, to maybe retreat. And yet I also know that human beings have an instinct that allows us to be brave and to choose courage, particularly when something we really care about is at stake. It could be something as simple as having an instinct to want to indulge all of our immediate gratifications. But we also know there's some part of us who really wants to invest in the future and make choices that that contribute to our future well-being. Even just this morning when my alarm went off early so that I could exercise before this conversation, there was a part of me that did not want to get out of bed. That was my true self. I didn't want to get out of bed. And yet also there was another part of my true self that really wanted to feel how I knew I would feel if I got up and I put on my sneakers and I did my morning workout. And somehow I negotiated those two parts of myself in a way that ended up with me getting up and doing the workout and getting my endorphin rush and feeling really great. So I feel like that's, one of the reasons I turned to science and all these other areas that you mentioned is I feel like they have really interesting insights into this paradox of being human, why it is we have an instinct to be both self-protective and brave, why we have an instinct for immediate pleasure and also long-term well-being. We have these different aspects of ourselves. They're both real and true to who we are. They both have advantages and they both have their drawbacks. And what I'm really interested in is how we can meet these different parts of being human with self-compassion, compassion for other people who are struggling, by the way, with these things, and then use what these different fields can tell us about how to support the self who is really aligned with our higher values and aspirations.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, the science part. That's what I feel like, I don't want to speak for everybody, but maybe some people are missing. And an instant thought that they might have is just like, oh, I'm just lazy, or why can't I come up with a routine? And they just shame themselves, where you're saying, no, there is actually science. You can be both. You can not want to exercise at all, but you can also be this person. I've always done really well with now knowing like, no, there's actually science behind the way that you think and are. And it's not just, it makes me feel better that like there's science behind it.
I agree. I think science is a tremendous source of self-compassion. The way that I think about harnessing science is, first of all, I'm always drawn to studies that say like, it's not just you. So,
Yes.
for example, if you're somebody who, when you have a setback, you have this sense of shame and then the sense of wanting to give up and what's the point? And that leads you to maybe give up on your goals. To know that cycle, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're screwed up as a human being, that 85% of human beings, that's their default response to a failure. It's really nice to know like these are things that human beings experience. Yeah. And at the same time, what I love is, there's so many people, particularly in psychology, who've been like, well, how can we fix this? Like, how can we deal with this in service of being a better human? And what I love about science is if you have a finding. So for example, I just mentioned we tend to be hard on ourselves and give up on our goals. There are a lot of studies showing that there are simple ways to forgive yourself or to remind yourself that you're not the only one who struggles. And that little like mindset check can help you re-engage with your goals. But every study, there's like a distribution. For some people, it works really well. For some people, it works well enough. And for some people, it's just not the thing. And I love that science also gives us permission to treat ourselves like an experiment where we can figure out, is this true for me? Does this support me? Does it contribute to an outcome that I value? And so science is actually encouraging us again and again to actually trust ourselves and to trust our direct experience, as opposed to having to kind of, blindly follow rules or ideas that somebody else tells us will be good for us. I love that mindset of take care of yourself, trust yourself, pay attention to what actually works for you.
Yeah. And just educating yourself. Like like you said, with the science stuff, one of the biggest examples that came to me now that we were talking about Oprah was her book that she wrote with, now I can't remember the doctor's name, but What Happened to You?
Yes.
And all the science behind it. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not as screwed up as I thought I was. There's actually some science behind this. Thank you. And when you educate yourself, you really do cultivate more self-compassion for yourself, because you're not like, oh, this is just, yeah, it meant a lot for that. So that was really helpful. Okay, so let's talk about I've heard you say that new habits are built on foundations of intention, gratitude, joy, loving compassion, and interdependence. Can you talk to us about this foundation and how it supports us in creating positive change?
Yeah, everybody wants habits, because habits mean you figured out how to do something without a lot of effort and a lot of willpower, right? So everyone wants the positive habit of whatever it is they think is going to change their lives. Yeah. And we know that habits basically only come into formation when you have a clear goal. There's some sort of behavior that you think gets you closer to that goal. That's the intention part. And then you experience a reward for doing that behavior. And over time, you have such a clear association between what you want and the reward that you experience that things become more automatic. They become values, they become commitments, they become routines in a way that you don't have to struggle so hard to choose them anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, most people who have heard like behavior designers talk about habits, they're used to hearing the reward be something external. Like you need to create some reward structure to motivate yourself to do something you don't really want to do. Like talking about taking your dog for a walk in nature. Yeah. So a lot of people who talk about forming new habits, they're like, all right, well, clearly, if you really wanted to do that, you'd be doing it already. So we're going to have to like trick yourself or bribe yourself into actually doing it so that we can make it a habit. So what do you really want? And then like people start thinking in terms of indulgences, like what I really want is a treat afterwards. So if I take my dog for a walk, then I get to have a special coffee drink or a cookie or something like that. Yeah. Or I'll reward myself by watching Netflix. And people come up into all these like reward structures that actually make you pay less attention to why you thought this would be a positive habit in the first place, what it is you really want, the connection with nature, the connection with your dog, what you've noticed being in nature does to your mind, to your state of mind, your emotions, how it changes your perspective on life, whatever it is. Right. So when I talk about building habits on the foundation of positive emotions, I'm talking about the real rewards. If you're trying to build a habit that is consistent with your goals and values, with your well-being, with the relationships that matter most to you, there is an outstanding chance that behavior will come with direct rewards. You don't need to find these external rewards to convince yourself or persuade yourself to do it. You just have to pay attention to the actual consequences of doing this thing. Yeah. So I often will talk about emotions like gratitude. Maybe it's gratitude to yourself. For like, if you go for that walk with your dog, do you feel in the moment when you're out there a sense of, oh, I'm so glad I made this decision because I already feel better? Or when you come back, maybe this is such a good example because your dog is going to be so grateful to you. Right? So it could be the gratitude of like, wow, I turn and I look at my dog and I love my dog and my dog loves that we went for this walk and I feel great about that. As I'm saying this, I love that the cat on my lap is like, excuse me, please don't get a dog. Like,
I hear you talking a lot about dogs.
Right. So it could be something like gratitude. It could be something like you had mentioned loving kindness. Mm-hmm. Your example is so funny because it works both ways. You could be built on the sense of like one of the reasons, and this may not be true for you, but a lot of the people I've talked to who've had a desire to spend more time in nature, particularly to be active in nature, it's because they've noticed that is a behavior that really helps them with anxiety or depression or the way that their mind creates suffering. So a lot of people will go for a walk or a run or do yoga or swim outdoors because it's a true act of self-loving kindness and self-care. Yeah. It is part of how they deal with mental health struggles. It's a real gift. And so your habit could be based on that desire to do something for yourself that is a true act of love or care or support. And there are a lot of emotions like that. Like for me, this morning, I felt pride for doing grit, which is one of my favorite hard workouts. That favorite in the sense that I hate it half the time I'm doing it. And the other half, particularly in the rest intervals, I'm like, yes,
Right.
I'm amazing. Right. So I could go for the emotion of pride. I could go for the emotion of the endorphin rush that I get afterwards.
Yeah.
But a lot of these behaviors that people want to cultivate, they have these direct rewards. We feel good about ourselves. We feel better in our bodies. We feel better about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what I mean when I say that habits or changes is built on the foundation of positive emotions or states.
Yeah. You are so right about the external reward. Like, thinking back to the example that I gave about walking my dog, there's about a million things that I would go for. And you are right. Anxiety, depression, mental health is one of the big ones because we all know being out in nature helps us so much. But it is for those reasons that you said, the sense of peace, the sense of calm, the connection, where it's not like, oh, I can't wait to go back and go get myself that coffee or watch Netflix since I did my one walk today with my dog. It's everything that happens right during when we're doing it. So it's very interesting that you said that because so many of us are seeking that external reward. And it's like, be right now. Do you see everything you're getting out of it? That's what it's really about.
Yeah. And the thing is, it requires us to choose habits that really make a difference also.
Mm-hmm.
It requires us to think, is this thing that I'm committing to, is it the thing that's most likely to relieve some of my pain and suffering or give me greater joy or enable me to do everything else in my life that matters so much to me? Is it going to give me more energy? Is it going to give me more confidence? Because it's easy enough to pick something you're going to do every day for the satisfaction of just doing something every day. But not every choice we make is going to be life-changing,
Right.
that thing that creates an upward spiral. It's a wonderful inquiry to try to figure out, is this the thing? And by the way, like, even we can extend this to the coffee afterwards. I'm actually, I love coffee, so no shame on the coffee.
Right.
It could be that a cup of coffee is a habit that is life-changing. Well, first of all, because coffee itself is pretty good for your health. So it could be the thing. But again, it's that sense of inquiry that is this choice something that in the moment I feel these states of positive emotion, or afterwards I see how the consequences of making that choice are contributing to what I care about or what I value.
Yeah. So very true. Thank you. So I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, but we obviously know that you know your stuff. So what does the latest neuroscientific and behavioral research tell us about how we can create positive, lasting change in this new year ahead?
Oh, I'm trying to think if I've seen any great. So I'm working on a new book. So I got to tell you, all the research I've been looking at is on this new topic. I'm just like drowning. It's not habit change. I'll tell you. So one of the things that I think, I don't know if I've seen something recent that like blew my mind, but one of the things that I think, so two pieces of neuroscience that I think are really important to think about when it comes to habit change. Mm-hmm. One is about how old habits live in your brain. The other is about how the brain learns to reward you for things that are good for you. So let's start with the latter, which actually I think is kind of more inspiring. So let's take something like exercise. Mm-hmm. I'm really interested in how the brain rewards people for exercise by producing brain chemicals like dopamine and endorphins and endocannabinoids that like actually make exercise feel good and make you feel good for doing it and make it easier to do it. And that lasts can last for hours after a workout. Yeah. But what's interesting is that doesn't happen the first time you decide to do a workout. So if you're someone who has not exercised before, your brain doesn't actually know how to fully do this thing that it was born to do, to reward you for being active, right? You have the capacity for that reward. But when you look at the research, it takes about 6 weeks for your brain to kind of get it. 6 weeks of regular activity. So a few times a week, at least 20 minutes of going for a walk or whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
And so it's like the brain, it needs to adapt even to things that are innately good for you in order to give you a true sense of joy or to give you that real biochemical payoff. I think this is true for a lot of things too. I've spent many years teaching meditation. I also know when people sit down to meditate, usually their first experience is not bliss, is not.
No.
Right? So for a lot of the habits that we're trying to build, even ones that have these intrinsic rewards to them, it takes a certain amount of commitment for the brain to change itself in a way that gives you the full payoff. And often that change, it's quite dramatic. So I encourage people when they're choosing a new habit and they feel pretty confident this is something that is going to be good for them, whether it's meditation or exercise or spending time in nature, that you find the reward that is real, but that is about maybe something like feeling good about yourself for making this commitment to yourself, knowing that it's going to take a little bit of time maybe for your brain to figure out, yes, I love when I cook for myself and I'm eating less processed foods. Yes, I love doing something physically challenging and meaningful. Yes, I love whatever it is that you're committing to, sitting down and focusing on my breath. So to know that it's very similar to how the physical body changes. If you were to change your diet or to change what you do, it takes time for the physiology, the physical structure of yourself to change in a way that makes what you're doing easier and more rewarding. So that's one thing I think is interesting from the neuroscience. Yeah. And check in with yourself after 6 weeks, see like, oh, wow.
Right.
Like, if after 6 weeks you still hate it, there might be a
right.
problem.
You might need to switch it up.
And then the other thing, this is something that, I first saw in the neuroscience research, more than a decade ago, but it has really stuck with me, is that if you have changed a habit that was not helpful, that was rooted in, you mentioned trauma, that was rooted in trauma, negative experiences, maybe early childhood experiences, things like being really vigilant to potential threat. Or, for example, one thing that's really common is to be really sensitive to facial expressions of anger or fear, right? If you're someone who's lived with threat, you get really good at detecting it and maybe over detecting it so that you interpret other people's behaviors and expressions in ways that maybe make it harder to connect with them. So there are all these habits we can have that are rooted in experiences that are really about trying to protect ourselves from future harm and threat. So we know that there are a lot of things you can do to overcome them, but in periods of transition or crisis or stress, they often reemerge. What we see in the brain is that you're not erasing this stuff. Often what happens is higher parts of your brain learn to regulate these older habits. You are not just somehow eradicating their presence like they've never been there. They've never been a part of who you are. And so when we're exhausted or when we're in periods of a lot of uncertainty, it is easier for those old habits to reemerge. I mean, you see this, of course, in things like addiction and also other mental health challenges, things that we think we've overcome, they resurface. I think it's so important to know that it doesn't mean that whatever you've been doing doesn't work. It doesn't mean the therapy didn't work or the medication didn't work or the meditation didn't work or whatever. It means this is a moment where you're going to have to really recultivate or find new supports for yourself and go through that process again. And people get better at reemerging from whatever these habits are that we've been drawn into. And I think that it's, I think a lot of us wish that our brains were like an Etch-a-Sketch where you could just, do something and you've completely erased whatever it is. But, I think part of self-compassion is understanding that, that our life experiences are with us. They're part of who we are. And the best that we can do is introduce new skills and new strategies that allow us to integrate them and in many cases, replace them or override them with choices. It's like I started this conversation with, these two competing selves.
Yep.
But we're probably taking along that part of us for the whole journey.
Where I keep going back to is about the science, where I had to learn a lot of science to realize that I could change these habits, and that old habits aren't necessarily working with this new Melissa, And so that's where I'm like, okay, if science says that I can do this in a new way, then I don't always have to act this way. Like you said, paying attention to people's facial expressions because you're worried they're going to do something, I respond to something, how we respond. It's a lot about becoming aware of how you did act and how you did behave.
And it's interesting because the way that we're talking about it almost sounds like it can be very like intellectual, like you have to go in and think about this stuff. But I found, for overcoming habits like that are really deeply rooted in past experiences, giving yourself radically new experiences is one of the best ways to support habit change. Like I think about the smartest thing that I ever did to overcome the kind of habits we're talking about now that might be rooted that might express themselves in having challenges connecting with people or assuming the worst or being really vigilant to threat. The smartest thing I ever did was get more involved in volunteering. When you go out and your dominant role in different contexts is to show up and just help people.
Yep.
People are pretty much happy that you showed up.
Yep.
You get a lot of people smiling at you, right? There's less, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like, it was for me going into service roles, volunteering and also teaching, where for the first time in my life, I had to check my expectations and be like, oh, wow, people seem like happy to see me. Or my presence here seems to be valued. And it's a safe place to just show up.
Yeah.
So sometimes when we're trying to change deeply rooted habits related to emotions or expectations, to put ourselves in an environment where the default way that other people view us, right? That can be one of the best things that we can do for ourselves, and doesn't always have to be going into your head and trying to think about things differently. I mean, it's this is a principle of a lot of different psychotherapy approaches, where the idea is you actually create change in your environment in order to support who it is that you want to become.
In your latest book, The Joy of Movement, How Exercise Helps Us Find Happiness, Hope, Connection, and Courage, you provide a revolutionary way of looking at movement that is refreshing and eye-opening. What you present goes way beyond the familiar pro-exercise argument. So let's begin there. How can movement help us create new habits that bring us in connection with our happiness?
Yeah. So movement is just engaging with life through your body, right? So it's the opposite of being physically inactive and sedentary. So by movement, I'm including everything we would think of as exercise, and also sports, and also gardening and play and dance and spiritual practices that use the body, and window shopping in your neighborhood, like all of that stuff. It's just
everything.
It's being engaged through your body to the degree that your body allows you to. So one of the foundations for this book and for like this work is the idea that around the world, people who are more physically active, they tend to be happier in every way that we define it, whether it's feeling more connected to their communities, or feeling more positive emotions like love and gratitude, or finding relief from, or sometimes being protected against things like depression and anxiety, being able to move through things like grief and trauma. So there's something about being physically active that lets us connect with our capacities for connection and purpose and recovery and well-being. And one of the reasons why I think that is true is that when you look at when people choose to be active, they are almost always choosing one of the core human joys. So things like competition or cooperation, which you would see in any kind of sport, right? Yep. Things like music. So many people, the dominant part of their movement experience is the playlist that they're moving to. And it may be the only time of the day when they are immersed in this powerful technology that changes our mood and connects us to meaning and makes us feel empowered. Yeah. For many people, it's nature. Being physically active is the only time of the day when they're in nature. And we know how important nature is for our mental health and sometimes for our spiritual health. Right. It can put us in communities where we are allowed to bring our full selves without a lot of other obligations and expectations. The type of relationships and social connection we have when you're at a dance class or you're, playing basketball out on a court with friends or strangers, when you're, in a boat rowing with people, whatever it is that you're doing, we experience this kind of social connection that it's not, you have to be a certain way and people have these expectations of you and the obligations you have to be in charge or take care of other people or meet other people's needs. It's a wonderful social joy. Yeah. So I could go on and on. There's a whole lot of these different joys, but I think it's one of the reasons it's not just like you move your body and that is the essential good. It's that we are moving our bodies in these contexts that for many people, it's the only time they get to enjoy this side of themselves and what it means to be human. That's part of it. The other part is there is this essential benefit of being physically active. And I will give you, this is my favorite idea that connects all movement to happiness. And it's the idea that our muscles are like a happiness pharmacy. So your muscles can create all sorts of molecules and chemicals that are good for you. First of all, we didn't even know this until this last decade. We thought muscles just moved our bones around. But your muscles are these little, they're these little manufacturing machines that are producing all these chemicals, your biceps, your quadriceps, whatever. Mm-hmm. And these chemicals, they store them up and they wait for you to use your muscles through movement to release them into your bloodstream. So some of these chemicals kill cancer cells, some of them boost your immune system, some of them regulate your blood sugar, some of them make your bones stronger. Great stuff. But a lot of these chemicals travel through your bloodstream to your brain where they act like antidepressants and anti-anxiety molecules, and they change your brain to make you more sensitive to joy, better able to connect with other people, more resilient to stress. It's amazing. And your muscles are making these molecules for you. And every time you move your body, you are increasing the levels of these molecules in your bloodstream. So that's another way to think about why movement connects us to happiness. I call them hope molecules. I borrowed that from a scientific article that I read because I like to think of exercise as like an intravenous dose of hope, literally.
Right.
And I love that because it's also another way to think about our bodies, because so often people think about exercise as being what you do because your body is bad.
Yes.
Right? And so we force our body to do something we don't like because there's something wrong with what our body looks like, or our body is just one big disease risk waiting to turn into that disease we don't want. So many messages that we've gotten. But when you think about your muscles as being pharmacies, and all you have to do is invite them to move in any kind of movement you can tolerate, or better yet, a movement you enjoy, any muscle, any activity, and you are giving yourself life, you're giving yourself health, you are giving yourself antidepressant molecules. That is a much better way to think about your body. Good job, body. Thank you, muscles.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, sometimes I feel like the pro exercise argument, we have just these certain amounts. Sometimes I say, think of people like, all I can do is run and lift weights and cardio and more weights and all these things that, well, that's what we're kind of like fed on magazines, whatever, media, where there's so many different things. And it's like what you enjoy could be completely opposite, but it's about you. You don't have to listen to the rest of the world or media. And like you said, whether it's dancing, yoga, whatever, it's what's
walking
best
your
for
dog. And also that there's a lot of different ways to enjoy it, because sometimes people get hung up on the idea that every moment of movement has to be pleasurable in a certain way. And, so my first book was about chronic pain, because I'm somebody who has lived with chronic pain my entire life. The book about movement, almost everyone in it has a serious challenge related to movement, whether they're in a wheelchair, they're recovering from a stroke, they have Parkinson's disease, they have severe depression, they're in the midst of grief. I 100% understand the real challenges that exist towards moving, whether they're physical or emotional or time or family related. I understand it. And so I want to be really clear when we're talking about all of this. Sometimes it's the movement is the medicine that gets you through. Sometimes the movement itself, it involves physical discomfort because you live in a body that produces discomfort. I'm one of those people. I never expect to have a day without physical pain and discomfort. What I found is that movement involves some pain and discomfort, just like not moving involves some pain and discomfort. That's what that's my reality. Yeah. And so enjoying movement can mean I'm going to choose this kind of discomfort for this, these 20 minutes because I like how I feel afterwards. I've noticed that it actually changes my ability to tolerate discomfort in other situations that are meaningful or situations I can't control, right? But I've learned how to deal with discomfort. So there's a lot of different ways to experience joy through movement. And I did want to say that because it's easy to make assumptions that we're talking to just people who are natural athletes or don't experience any obstacles.
Right, exactly. And I'm glad that you noted that. And something that was big for me is, like you said, people that are going through grief or struggle with mental health. And so if somebody is struggling with their mental health, and where I guess I'm always coming from a place of like, if somebody is struggling with even like self-love, self-compassion, self-worth, where they're like, why do I need movement? I'm not worth it. What advice could you give to somebody? We're getting ready this is the new year, and people are like, I didn't go to the gym and this is what everybody else in the world is doing. What advice would you have for them to get started in starting one new habit?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, hopefully you're taking care of yourself in other ways also. So like, if you're dealing with grief or depression like that, there are things beyond exercise to do to support yourself.
Yeah.
Therapy, support groups, medication, whatever that is. But I've been there in those moments, particularly grief. There are all the things that you mentioned, grief, depression, they can, the thing that it makes them so hard, like that makes them so difficult to be in, is that these are states that interfere with positive motivation on purpose. That is their evolutionary function. They slow you down. They literally make it harder to move. They make it harder to start. It can feel like you are being weighed down and sucked down. And it's at every level of what's happening in your brain and your body. So that's the reality of it. And so you're looking for anything that helps you overcome that barrier to activation. And this is where you pull in resources. Sometimes you have to outsource it to somebody else. So there have been times in my life where I needed to recruit my spouse to get me out of bed. I could not rely on my alarm clock. Now I'm at the point in my life where if I choose the right song, this is actually very important, that an alarm is not going to do it. I need a song that reminds me of my values, and that song helps me get myself out of bed now. That's the stage that I'm in. But I think that, and sometimes it's about doing something for somebody else. Sometimes, depending on what's weighing us down, sometimes the idea that somebody else wants us to show up, or we're doing it to help someone else, sometimes that is enough when we wouldn't do it for ourselves. until you can find someone to make a commitment to. Since you mentioned walking a dog, let me just put this out there. Some of you may not have a dog, but you may live in a city that has an animal shelter that has a volunteer program where you can take dogs for walks or play with dogs. You should look into that. If you want to start exercising and you don't have a pet, that could be a good motivator.
Yeah.
But I think that the other thing is to make it as small a dose and to trust the smallest dose possible. Because this is something that I've seen in a lot of different areas when people are looking to make a change, whether it's something you're trying to do, like exercise or meditate, or whether it's something you're trying to not do. Sometimes the smallest actions, eventually, it's not magic, but it's almost like magic. Eventually they become something bigger through the process of just trust. And that's how change unfolds. So let me give you an example that is hard for most people to believe. There's research that if you're somebody who wants to quit smoking and you can just delay your first cigarette by a few minutes, whatever your normal is, like I wake up and 10 minutes later, I'm smoking a cigarette, you manage to make it 15 minutes. There's something about making a commitment to doing something that's just a little bit different than the default, that is consistent with a bigger goal that you have for yourself, that makes it more likely you will have the big win, that ultimate aspiration. So, figure out what that is for you. Delay something by a minute. And while you're delaying, just remind yourself of what your ultimate goal is. Or do that thing for 1 minute. Take a few breaths. Do a single yoga pose. Forget the mat. You don't have to change your clothing. Just do like warrior pose or whatever you love. Put on one song and dance to it. Take one item in your cart. If you're trying to spend less money, put it back on the shelf. But, if you're trying to build relationships, maybe your habit is you want to spend more time with friends. Next time you're on social media, get off social media and send an actual text message that has an actual supportive message to someone you care about.
Yeah.
It's the small doses, the small actions.
Yeah. I love that you said those, because the small is what eventually adds up. People often think that they have to make these big changes. And then when the big changes don't happen, they feel defeated and then they just give up. But that's where I've always done much better in the small doses, especially because I'm a perfectionist. So I usually want to go way overboard. It's always the small stuff that's always gotten me further results than thinking I got to do it all in one day.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Okay. So I find your exploration of the mind and body connection particularly revealing. You have said that our body is constantly narrating a story to the brain about who we are. You speak about how through our experience of our body, we understand who we are and come to understand how we feel about ourselves, which reinforces certain behaviors. Can you explain this more? How does connecting with our mind and body help us establish better habits and as a result, better relationship with ourselves?
Yeah, I think, I think that better relationship with yourself is probably where I think about this. This is the core understanding that how you feel about yourself and how you understand what your emotions are, what your mental state is. A big part of what's happening is your brain is listening to your body. It is factoring in things like your heart rate and your breathing, your posture, the level of glucose and other things that are in your bloodstream, the level of oxygen that's in your bloodstream. Your brain is there are receptors for all sorts of interesting things.
Right.
And even though we're not conscious of all of them, your brain is listening to these signals and interpreting them. So one of the things that one of the ways that I harness this is as a movement instructor. I'm always thinking about movements that have meaning. So for example, I created the joy workout because we know that there are certain movements that people do when they feel joyful, when they want to celebrate, and when they want to connect with other people. Things like making these soft fists and throwing your hands in the air or pumping. I just see it all the time. Once you know it, you see it all the time. When people are happy, they do this. So, I created this workout that's just a few joy moves where you just do it on
Right.
purpose. And people tend to feel more joyful afterwards because it's not really like you're manipulating yourself, but you're just giving your brain new information to pay attention to.
Right.
We know that when you get your heart rate up a little bit, most people feel more alive, more optimistic. So if you have been sedentary for a while and your heart rate is low and you just get up and do anything that gets your heart rate up, most people will feel more hopeful and energized and optimistic because your brain senses a slight acceleration of your heart rate as being a sign that you're doing something that matters. So there's just like little things like that that you can do to figure out what do you want your brain to think is happening right now? And what are ways that you can use your body to produce those signals? And it can be the other direction too. So, if what you want your brain to know is that everything is okay, you might choose to do a slower breathing exercise because a slower, deeper respiration rate is often a sign of feeling secure.
Yeah.
But there's another way you can get a sense of security too. It's interesting. You can engage your deep core muscles. It's funny. It's like there are two ways for your brain to know everything's okay. One is this kind of relaxation, which is really about external safety.
Right.
Listening to calming music is another way to do this, in part because it changes your respiration and a deceleration of your heart rate if you were in that state and it didn't feel good. But bracing your core muscles sends your brain the signal, I've got this. It's like an inner strength as opposed to having to control the safety in the outer world. So it's one reason why people often love core workouts or bar or Pilates or yoga, because you're activating these deep core muscles that give you this message that says, you've got this. It's this kind of like confidence. So, I think there are a lot of things like that. I should mention another one, since it's not all exercise. We know that if you want to feel more alive, having a more expressive face is a really great signal to your brain that you are alive and engaged. Yeah. So I think singing is such a great way to do this, because do karaoke or lip sync. You pick a song you love and you bring all this life into your face and maybe your whole body, like some air guitar. And it's a great kind of antidepressant or a great way of tapping into a sense of confidence or enthusiasm for life.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you gave examples of not just exercise, because of course there's other habits besides exercise, but then there's non-exercise habits. So thank you for sharing that. All right. So as we move towards the end of our time together today, what are some final things that you can share with our audience to help people make this the best year of their lives?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I feel like, so I've done this series a number of times and I feel like I've said the same thing at the end of every one, which is that this question is very triggering. How can we guarantee this is going to be the best year of your life? The first thing I always think is I get hit with this knowing that it's not going to be the best year of every person's life. And it's so funny. I always, and then I think, why go there, Kelly? That is not what they want you to talk about, but I can't help it. It's this kind of empathy for the fact that we can do all the right things and have all the right aspirations. And for some people, it's going to be the hardest year of their life. And I think that there's something, so knowing that could be coming, that the best thing to do for yourself is to appreciate how lucky we are if we have another year like this. And there is going to be, there's going to be a time where that's not true.
Right.
And to imagine yourself at the end of next year, what are you going to be grateful to yourself for no matter what happens this year?
Yeah.
Like, what is not going to have been a waste of your time? What is going to build the resources that help you meet whatever's coming? Or what is going to be a memory that you are going to cherish, that at the end of your life, you're going to look back and say, I am so glad that I planned that adventure, that I made that change, that I spent my time in that way, because I'm going to look back and be proud or remember with joy, or, like to really for a moment think about life as a gift. And it's not about how you're going to change yourself or
Yeah.
improve yourself. It's this year is going to happen. It's going to fly by, and you are going to get to live with the consequences of whatever you invested and however you committed to yourself. So to think about it from that point of view.
Yeah.
And I hope, I hope that this year is full of joy and meaning, no matter what happens, right? No matter what the challenges are.
Right. That is like one of the best, most honest answers that you could give, because I feel obviously it's a new year and people have all this expectations of everything they're going to do and it's going to be their best year, where you're coming from it at the other side to say, but if it's not, that is okay, because try to be grateful for what you either learn from it, or maybe it is painful and you're going to go through a lot of healing and grieving, because of course everybody thinks it could be their best year. But that is a very honest answer.
And listening to you, it's so great when people repeat back what you say, but they spin it in a way that like how you heard it.
Yeah.
Not how I heard what you just said. Also, it reminds me of the thing we were talking about, how we can make meaning out of experiences we would not have chosen for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true also, like no matter what this year is, there's certain mindsets we can cultivate that increase the chance that if we're here 10 years or 20 years or 30 years from now, we're going to look back at this year with a sense of gratitude towards ourselves, or maybe even amazement that we got through it.
Yep.
Maybe it was a turning point. So maybe this year, that's another question I often like to encourage people to ask themselves, both when they have their highest aspirations, like what's the best possible thing that could happen this year? Right. And also when they're at a real low point. Is to ask yourself, if I were to look back 10 years from now and say, that was a turning point in my life, what's the story you're going to be telling? I mean, just make it up. Yeah. Like, what if this were the turning point today, this moment? Just imagine, tell yourself a story. How was it a turning point? And that can help us figure out both, the aspirations that reflect the joy and the positive change we want, but also the way that we make meaning out of things that were difficult.
Exactly. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us today. This has been an absolute pleasure. Can you tell people how to find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, my website, kellymcgonigal.com.
Perfect. It's all there, guys. Well, thank you again, Kelly.